Good evening from India. Good morning to our friends in North America and Canada and some other parts of the world. It is indeed my proud privilege to welcome all of you to this conference, and in particular to the 9th thematic session entitled Before the Law School Admissions During COVID-19. We have with us a very distinguished group of individuals, higher education leaders, transformative individuals who have been leading their own law schools. Let me first introduce my own colleague, Professor Arjya Majumdar, the Dean of Admissions and Outreach at Jindal Global University, who will be moderating the session. We have with us Professor Elizabeth Kronk, Jefferson and Rita Fordham, Presidential Dean of the S.J. Quinney School of Law, University of Utah, United States of America, Professor Gregory N. Mandel, Dean of the Beasley School of Law, Temple University in the US. We are expected to have Professor Mario Spangenberg, Dean of the School of Law at the Catholic University of Uruguay, and of course, my very dear friend, Professor Eduardo Peñalver, the Allan R. Tessler Dean and Professor of Law, Cornell Law School at Cornell, and also the President-elect of Seattle University, United States. With those words, I'm going to give this session to Arjya to take it forward. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction, Professor Raj. I'm looking forward to a wonderful thematic session with all our panelists. This is a thematic session on Before the Law School Admissions During COVID-19. In the words of Albert Camus, what we learn in the time of pestilence, that there are more things to admire in men than to despise. Law schools across the world have been navigating through an unprecedented situation during this COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has posed many such challenges in admitting students to law schools. Now, the traditional method of holding a physical entrance examination in a room full of law aspirants seems to be a distant reality in the new normal. Responses from certain quarters have been glaring examples of a tectonic shift in holding law school admission tests. The Lsat Flex, administered by the Law School Admission Council, made a transition from a computer-based on-site testing to a remotely held AI-proctored testing. Now, such tests, while providing a seamless solution to students and institutions to smoothly sail through the admissions process, help them to save any perceived delays in law school admissions caused by the pandemic. This brave experiment by the LSAC struck a fine balance between the ethos of the law school admission tests and the health and safety of our students. However, although the success story of LSAC is inspiring, every law school admission test did not receive a similar reception. The veracity and fairness of many such tests were questioned by test takers both in media and before courts of law. It looked like many were not prepared to depart from conventional ways judging institutional admissions against pre-pandemic standards. In certain quarters, admission tests were even held physically, although maintaining social distancing norms, however, to some extent, risking the health and safety of our students. Now, these developments prompt many questions. How important is the entrance test for law school admissions? Can performance in a qualifying degree or an examination can be a qualitatively equivalent alternative to law school admission tests? What are the checks and balances to be put into place to conduct law school admission tests online? Why is it important for law schools to rely on admission tests conducted by their parties as against indigenously developed tests? Have admission tests been conducted during the pandemic using modern technology? Have they achieved the same qualitative outcomes which a similar test held otherwise would have achieved? Now, this distinguished panel will deliberate on many of these and similar questions on law school admissions during COVID-19. I'd like to direct my first question and to kickstart the discussion to Professor Elizabeth Kronk Warner. Now, Professor Warner, the year 2020 is indeed a difficult and different year for all of us, and especially for admission to law schools worldwide. It's because physically holding admission and entrance examinations became increasingly difficult, if not completely impossible. Now, there has been a sea change in the way admissions to law courses have been carried out in a post or a within pandemic world. How have law schools adapted to this sudden change? And in particular, what outreach initiatives can law schools engage in to reach out to aspiring law school candidates and to ensure that they have an equal opportunity to access legal education in spite of an ongoing pandemic? Professor Warner.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here today. It is an honor to be here with you and have a chance to talk about this. At the University of Utah, we have a statement that we like to read anytime we're presenting because where we're located in the Salt Lake Valley, which is in Utah, is traditionally indigenous land. So if you will indulge me, I like to start off any presentation by acknowledging that we are on indigenous land, at least where we are at the University of Utah. And we acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe here in the United States, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshu, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. So I think it should be particularly appropriate that we should acknowledge the traditional homeland that at least the University of Utah we're on, because this traditional territory was where many indigenous peoples around Utah came to gather. And so it seems appropriate that we should be gathering here today. Although the method of gathering has definitely changed over the centuries, it's wonderful that we can still be here today. So in terms of how law schools are responding and having outreach to individuals who are interested in going to law school, I think there are a couple of layers to that. So first, one thing that has been very helpful in that outreach is the LSAC in terms of their ability to have developed the test taking and the technology to make it possible to take remote tests. And that's really a credit to the leadership of Kelly Testy and the fact that she saw the need for having online exams. And they've done a couple of things that have made taking the exam much more accessible to everybody, from things like providing tablets to individuals who need a tablet to take the exam. So the availability of technology is not a barrier. They've entered into agreements with hotels in the United States that hotels will typically have Wi-Fi and internet capabilities in the lobby. And so students who may not have stable Wi-Fi available at home can go to the hotels and take advantage of their stable Wi-Fi and be able to take their exam on a tablet provided by the LSAC, on stable internet provided by the hotel. So I really appreciate the leadership of the LSAC in terms of not only spending the years that it took to develop a scalable test with reliability factors built in, but they've also thought about a lot of those barriers such as technology, both in terms of the physical tablets and the computers, but they've also thought about the need to have stable internet connections in order to take the exam. And so a lot of what we've been able to do in the United States is a blessing because of LSAC's efforts to work through a lot of those challenges. And then from the law school specific perspective, in some ways, the pandemic and what it's forced us to do has been a blessing, because what I've heard from a lot of sectors is that we've been able to have better outreach to people around the country, around the world, in terms of we've come up with virtual building tours. We have one that's on the website that's just, anybody can click on it, but also we have the technology now that our admissions team can actually take a group of people around on the computer using a stabilized camera so that they can walk around the building with those individuals. And so the pandemic has forced us to invest in new technology that's been really helpful in that outreach. We still have those same challenges that the LSAC had in terms of not everybody has accessibility to both Wi-Fi and to computers. And so the University of Utah has invested in quite a number of computers, and so that anybody can take take those computers out from our library. So if somebody has the ability to physically get to our library, they can borrow those computers. And then also we now have these mobile buses with Wi-Fi capabilities on the bus. And so we can go and kind of park a bus in a parking lot. And so if people need accessibility, they can get it through that mobile bus. So I like the quote that you started off with, because I think it's indicative to the fact that this pandemic is certainly not anything that anybody wanted, but it's really forced us to be innovative. And in many sectors, I'm hearing back that we're having better communications with some populations than we did before because of those technological investments and because of the need to think outside of the box in terms of how to reach out to people. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Elizabeth. I'm so glad that we are able to use the technology that existed even before. It's just that we've been thrust into a situation where we're thinking of new, innovative, and out-of-the-box uses for that technology. For my next question, I'm going to turn to Professor Gregory Mandel. And while the Lsat is an examination that focuses on comprehension skills, on analytical skills, and logical skills, there have been emerging demands for social justice and increased requirement for sensitivity, compassion, and emotional intelligence. While treating legal issues born in the times of COVID-19. So Professor Mandel, I'd like to ask you, how should the selection criteria of law schools evolve to attract students with higher levels of EQ? If at all, we should be required to change our selection criteria or adjust our selection criteria to attract students with higher levels of EQ. Professor Mandel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. I'm honored to take part in it, and thank you for moderating this panel, which is already off to a good start. And hopefully, I won't throw a wrench into the conversation in that regard. Picking up a little bit where we left off, I think one piece that's worth saying is that throughout all the great challenges we've had in our lives and our institutions around the world due to this pandemic, I think one surprising piece is how little has changed. A lot of our admissions process, although it's taking place entirely or almost entirely remotely, is still using similar kinds of tests, still using similar kinds of application information as at the University of Utah, and I'm sure lots of law schools. We figured out how to do virtual tours so students can get a sense of how we interact with students. And I would say your question here is a very good one, but the answer is a little bit the same. There have been some adjustments, but not huge adjustments. So Temple Law School was founded in the late 19th century with a mission of providing a legal education to populations of students for whom that had not usually been available, for whom entering the legal profession had not previously been an option. At that time, in our location in Philadelphia, in the United States, that extension, which was really quite innovative, meant expanding the opportunity for law school to working class white males. We were an early, but the mission around access has been true for us for our 125 years. We're actually celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. And so we were a very early law school to admit women and to admit students of color. It's something that runs through our DNA. So although we always work to improve, I would like to think that the attention to social justice, as it is pursued in part by expanding access to the profession and access to the justice system, it is part of what we've focused on since the beginning. In that vein, our admissions process has always looked very holistically at students. we certainly pay attention to LSAT scores and GPA and the quantitative metrics that are out there and are useful. But we also, for a long time now, have looked for students with other qualities. We've looked for students who have demonstrated, perhaps through some prior work experience or service in the military or volunteer activity, that they've demonstrated leadership, resilience, perseverance, the kinds of traits that we think make it more likely that they are going to succeed in law school, but also make it more likely that they will be fabulous lawyers. And so our search for those capabilities, I think, again, dovetails with some of the needs that we see now. I would frame sort of the questions around support that are touched on in this question and sensitivity a little bit also in the context of a problem we're seeing generally in the U.S., and I've heard it a little bit from international colleagues as well, although I don't want to speak to an area I don't know as well. But we're having students who, even before the pandemic and before the particular attentions to racial injustice that have where there's been a greater focus this summer, although the problem actually obviously has been with us for many hundreds of years. But there's been a great increase in students with health and wellness challenges. And so we've been building up a lot of support for those students as well. And I would say those factors have been a little bit more what we're focusing on in terms of student support and looking at student capabilities. Looking for students still who come from underrepresented backgrounds is very important to us. Looking for students who we think have those other kinds, of, as you said, EQ capabilities that help make a good lawyer but aren't tested on the LSAT or aren't tested in law school exams. We've been looking for that for a long time. We still have. And as your question indicated, we think those qualities will help make them more attuned to some of the issues we're dealing with in society, help make them be more productive lawyers as we work towards greater social justice, racial justice, and improving society. So it's there's a little bit of a shift, but it's also something we've been doing for a long time. Thank you.
Good to know, Professor Mandel. And of course, issues on social justice, on racial injustice are paramount in today's times, and it's important for us to bring in students and to mold them further so that they leave the world a better place than they found it. I'm going to now turn to Professor Eduardo Peñalver. So Professor Peñalver, I'm going to pose this question to you. Now, the pandemic has completely disturbed the normal. The usual standards and metrics have suddenly become redundant. At this stage, what should be the considerations before testing agencies and law schools in conducting admission tests and in admitting students? Apart from the qualifying examination, and I know Professor Gregory touched on this a little bit, but I want to hear from you as well. Apart from the qualifying examination score, what other forms of assessment could be used in the selection process to identify whether or not a particular student is a good fit for the school's vision and to meet the student's legal aspirations? Professor Peñalver.
Well, thanks for the question. Also, thanks, Raj, for inviting me to be part of this conversation, which I'm finding very fascinating and obviously timely. So, I think one of this question sort of combines the first two questions in a way and brings to the foreground some of the challenges with the admissions testing in the current environment. But I think in a way, some of those challenges just highlight some of the problems with the excessive reliance on those mechanisms even before the pandemic. So one of the things that we know about standardized testing is one of the strongest predictors of success on standardized testing, both at the undergraduate level and at the law school level, is parental income. And so standardized testing is this interesting sort of mechanism that both gives and takes at the same time, right? On the one hand, one of its benefits is that it can sort of surface really talented applicants who are coming from backgrounds that are not extremely privileged. Like, so if you're coming from an undergraduate institution that's not highly prestigious, then a strong Lsat score can kind of make you rise to the top of an applicant pool in a way that might not otherwise be the case. So it provides opportunity, but at the same time, it reproduces all the systems of privilege that we have in our society. And so people who have more resources to prepare for that standardized test are going to perform better on the standardized test. That was true, before COVID, right? But one of the things that COVID has done is could have put a question mark around the standardized testing in a way that hopefully will get schools to look beyond that, right? So it's not a matter of eliminating standardized testing as a pathway, but maybe making it not the exclusive pathway, or not as important as it has been historically for admissions, not just at law school, but to earlier stages of education as well. The LSAT Flex, which you mentioned, is great. It has increased accessibility to a certain extent. At the same time, there are some problems with online administration of exams. We mentioned the access to technology, which it's great to see what LSAC's doing to overcome those challenges, but there are also questions around the online proctoring and the artificial intelligence, which I think we don't know enough yet about some of the biases embedded within the artificial intelligence that runs the online proctoring and that kind of flags certain people for closer scrutiny. And there are some questions about the scores themselves. Some data that I saw recently suggested that the percentiles may not line up quite the way they do the LSAT Flex with the in-person LSAT prior to COVID. So that's led us to kind of examine those scores with a little more scrutiny, which I think is for the better, to sort of take standardized test scores with a little bit of a grain of salt, and to look to additional metrics of excellence or potential. Obviously, performance in the undergraduate institution is another primary area that we focus on. But one of the things that I'm constantly struck by as I look at law school admissions is just how much we don't know. So what we know, right, the data that we have suggests that the LSAT, possibly the GRE, combined with undergraduate GPA is the strongest numerical predictor we have of success in the first year of law school. What we don't have great data about, first of all, it doesn't even predict the majority of performance in the first year. So there's all that, performance in the first year that's sort of predicted by other factors that we don't have a good handle on. And then in addition to that, what is the connection between performance in the first year of law school and success in the legal profession or potential for success in the legal profession? We don't have much data on that as far as I can tell. And so if what we're trying to do is admit students who can succeed in law school and go on to become great lawyers, there's just a lot that we don't know. And every year when I look at the results from our first year performance and compare it to the admissions metrics, we have students who come in and vastly outperform the predicted metrics, and we have students who vastly underperform their predicted metrics, and we have students who were barely admitted off the skin of their teeth, through the wait list, who go on to be at the top of their class and become editors-in-chief of the Law Review, and we have students who we fully expect to come in and excel, who flame out. And so that just fills me with a great deal of humility and trepidation about the admissions process generally, and suggests that we need to do a lot more work to find out more about applicants, beyond our existing kind of holistic admissions process that looks at what they've done in terms of their what Dean Mandel was talking about, the military service or work experience or obstacles overcome, but find additional ways to get an angle on in a comprehensive way, like what what will make a student more likely to succeed or less likely to succeed at our law school and in the profession. And I just think that we need to be investing in research on those questions. And I know some of that's happening around some of these soft skills and kind of EQ, as you were putting it. But there's just, there's a lot more to do. And I think COVID has kind of helped surface those, but those were questions that were there well before COVID.
Well, I completely agree with you, Professor Peñalver. I mean, it's very difficult to predict, what's going to happen to a law student once they get in. That in itself could act, getting into law school itself could act as an incentive to sort of pull oneself up by one's bootstraps, I suppose. For my next question, I'm going to turn back to Professor Warner. Professor Warner, there's been a lot of anxiety amongst aspiring law school students with regard to the future of their academic pursuits. Now, and again, there's been an unprecedented technological disruption, which has resulted in what we've been talking about so far, the online AI-enabled remote proctored entrance exam, including the Lsat. What are your views on the effectiveness on online examinations and also the associated integrity? Because this is a major question that has come up in India and before Indian courts as well. The security and the transparency of AI-enabled remote proctored exams. Does this represent a need of the hour, or is this going to be the new future for law school entrance exams?
Well, thank you. And specific to the LSAT exam and LSAC, again, to Kelly Tessie's leadership, they anticipated the need for this exam. So my understanding is that this examination has been being tested for years. So it's specific to the LSAC and the LSAT exam, this is something that's been in the progress for, I believe she mentioned, either 3 to 5 years. So that particular examination is not something that they've unleashed in response to the pandemic. It just happened very coincidentally, and to our benefit in law school and to their benefit as an institution, that they happened to have it ready to go in time for the pandemic. But that being said, even though years were spent on scaling the examination and making sure that the test scores were reliable, what we're seeing, at least so far, and it hasn't even been a full year since we've had the LSAT Flex, is that there is a perception, rather rightly or wrongly, that the online examination is easier. You do see that among law student applicant websites where students are talking about the fact that they think the exam is easier. And we have seen an increase in exam scores. So an exam score that would have been in the 80 percentile in past years is now in the 70 percentile this year. So there does seem to be, at least anecdotally, of course, that could also be that for whatever reason, more capable or students who are more capable at taking the LSAT, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're more capable law students, are taking the exam. There's also been an increase in the United States in students with higher credentials who are taking the exam in general. So there could be a connection there. And again, I think it's too early in the LSAT Flex to necessarily say that it's easier. But there is a perception that it's easier amongst test takers. And we have seen a bit of an increase in the LSAT exam. So the LSAT result has been interesting. In terms of moving forward, I think the LSAT Flex example tells us that it can be done. And again, LSAC has put a lot of time and effort into thinking through how to address the technological issues, how to address some of those social justice issues that Dean Mandel was talking about, although there's a lot of work still to be done. But conversely, in the United States, we've also seen that it has to be done deliberatively, and it can't be done on the fly or in immediate response. So on the other end, in the United States, we have a bar examination that students have to take before they're licensed to practice law in the vast majority of the states within the United States. And there, the institution that creates although the individual states give the bar exam, there is an institution that provides the bar examination questions. And that has been a complete mixed bag in terms of whether or not it's been successful, because unlike the LSAC, the NCB, which comes up with those questions, and then the states, which give the examination, it's been a complete mixed bag between some states have been able to pivot and do things online, and some states have not. So for example, I believe I saw an article that said that the Florida bar results just came out and the bar passage rate was very, very low, suggesting that perhaps that pivot to online had not been successful. So we've seen both examples, but I think the big takeaway is that it's very, very difficult to move these assessments to an online format in a way that's not deliberative and hasn't been tested and scaled, and that's something that is very, very difficult to do very quickly. And so that just complicates all these discussions that we're having in terms of the social justice issues that you raised, and how we effectively respond to the pandemic. But it's definitely been a bit of there's been some good examples, but there's been a lot of bad examples in the United States too. So we're definitely learning from this grand experiment.
Right. And as we've seen throughout our respective careers, learning never stops, right? I mean, especially in a very changed scenario like this one. I'd like to turn to Dean Mandel now. And I know for a fact that much like most other American universities, international diversity is highly sought after. And it's a very important aspect of the law school experience is the diversity of candidates. Now, there are a number of countries, including the United States, which are highly sought after destinations for law students. Many of our faculty members at the OP Jindal Global University have had some qualifications from United States-based law schools. Now, although admissions to law schools in such countries is based on the performance in qualifying examinations, testimonials, letters of recommendation, and so on and so forth, the travel restrictions due to COVID-19 have been leading to deferrals and withdrawals by admitted students. Students who've been already admitted, who now choose to defer their studies by a year or withdraw completely. How can this problem be addressed? And I want to ask this of Dean Mandel. And how has this affected your law school?
Thank you. So I said in my first set of remarks that in many ways it's very surprising how little the pandemic has changed some things. And this is, this is an area touching on an area where there's been a huge change, an unfortunate change. And I would describe it more broadly as one of the biggest losses that we've all felt is the loss of certain communities. The loss of a kind of interpersonal interaction, which all of these Zoom meetings and phone calls and everything we're doing makes up for a little bit, but is really a much deeper challenge. It's interesting. We've been figuring out what our spring semester is going to look like in terms of in-person classes, how much we'll be able to do. And we did a survey of all of our current students, and we found a real sort of barbell effect in their responses. About half the students just wanted to be remote. They didn't want to deal with the challenges of being in person or the possible changes that would take place during the semester. And about half of the students wanted in person. And one of the striking things was that for those students who wanted any in person, they wanted as much in person as possible. There were not, for instance, students, there did not tend to be students who said, you know what, I'd like a little bit of in person. And then unsurprisingly, for the student, it was the first year students who wanted the in-person the most. Because upper level students, they've developed cohorts, they've developed relationships with some professors. They have that to fall back on. First year students, folks who started this fall, whether it's in the JD program or some of our international programs, really are missing that, and really missing that strongly. And those relationships are such an important part of law school that Zoom can't make up for them. That's a long introduction to the issues with respect to international students. As you said, it's I think I share this with my colleagues on this call as well. At Temple, we are a deep believer in international legal education, in global exchanges. I strongly believe that we often learn something about our own legal system by studying other legal systems, by hearing about how different things, different attributes can be handled differently. Sometimes it opens our eyes to the fact that how we assume something has to be done actually can be done differently. And so it's a really important part of our academic community, not just for the students, for the faculty as well. So both student and faculty exchanges are critical. And in the US, of course, we're dealing not only with the pandemic, but we're dealing with a president and administration who've been mildly hostile to global relations, very hostile in some categories. I say mildly hostile because with respect to education, there have certainly been some roadblocks thrown up, but things kept getting worse. But the combination of those two things, of the pandemic and the administration, have had a really horrible effect on where things are this year. Our LLM, International LLM program, unsurprisingly, is down. I'm sure that's true at every law school around the country. It's interesting what we have this year. We're not down to, we have more than 50% of where we usually are at. What we have is a mix of students who are already residents in the US, but foreign nationals and students from foreign countries who are doing it online. But they're just not getting the same experience, and our own students and faculty don't get the same thing from interacting. So I don't think that's something we can replace. I think it's very disappointing and has reduced the quality of both the students' experience and, as I said, the community's experience a little bit on the whole. On the other hand, thankfully, both of those challenges are challenges that are going to be cured next year, and I think certainly, obviously, the administration will change, and I think we'll become much more supportive of global educational exchanges again. And then also, the news on the vaccines is obviously fabulous, and we're all in for a long period, a long slog to get to the end result. But I feel very confident, not having any medical background, but we're all going to get out of this. And I really think next fall, by the time we get to next fall, at most of our universities, our schools around the world, things are going to be pretty much back to normal and headed towards fully back to normal. And so luckily, there's a very negative impact, but luckily it's a short-term impact, and we can start to build those relationships again. I'll share just one anecdote. So we have a unique program that we run in China. We're the only American law school that's licensed by the Chinese Ministry of Education to grant a degree in China. And so we run this program in Beijing for Chinese attorneys, government officials, prosecutors, judges, academics, practicing attorneys. And it's a slightly over a year-long program. They do most of their training, most of the education we conduct in Beijing, but they come to Philadelphia for a summer. And one of the traditions that's grown up is that they prepare a dinner for all the students and faculty who have been involved. It involves a lot of international students from other countries. All the Chinese students prepare a dinner where they all make a meal from their region of China. And it has become this fabulous experience that brings together American law students, Chinese law students, American law professors, Chinese law professors, international students from other countries. And that opportunity to break bread and share in other people's cuisines, and it starts so many conversations that are both law related and non-law related. And I think it's something that, as you asked your question, I was thinking about response, that when I talk about loss of community, that's what we're missing. That's impossible to recreate over Zoom, but I think we'll get back there.
All right. I do agree that there has been a considerable loss in terms of the human connect and the human touch. And as you rightly mentioned, Dean Mandel, that these are absolutely critical for success in law school. I'd like to begin the wind-up proceedings by asking the final question that I have, and then we'll move on to the audience questions to Dean Peñalver. Now, I'd like to take off from where Dean Mandel mentioned about, the building, the forging relationships within law schools, right? Now, much like everywhere else in the world, the admitted batch of 2020 has not experienced a physical campus yet. The essential human factor, including all the psychological advantages it provides, has been unfortunately absent in their case. And as Dean Mandel was mentioning, that we'll expect things to be back to normal by fall 2021, but that is still another semester away. Now, does this absence affect legal education in any manner? And can we as law school administrators or as law school leaders engage to create a support system and a sense of belonging and a sense of identity for newly admitted students?
That's a great question. I mean, as effective as Zoom has been at overcoming some of the challenges that we've had to face, I think it's no substitute for in-person interaction, and something that we're all missing. Just coming into my building on a daily basis, the absence of hubbub is really gets me down. I mean, I miss just the flow of people and the casual interactions that you can have in between meetings and classes, and that's something that we're all losing, and the students are missing out on this fall. I think it affects the different classes very differently, exactly as Dean Mandel said, that when we polled our students to ask them, we didn't require anyone to come in. We gave everyone the option, and we just see this very interesting gradation where 90% of the 1Ls wanted to be in person. It was something like 60% of the 2Ls and like 30% of the 3Ls kind of playing to type with one foot out the door. They were very happy to be online. But the 1Ls in particular, right, are really hungry for that, for the opportunity to form community. The LLMs also, right, because they only have a 1-year program, are missing out on that. And what we did was, I think a number of schools did this. We gave students the option to start in August or in January. And what we found was that the vast majority of the LLM admitted students chose to start in January. So they did a little bit of online learning in the summer. And then they'll start some of them in person, some of them online in January, but then they'll have to wrap around to the fall, which turns out to be an opportunity, I think, to get hopefully some in-person experience because of the potential for a vaccine between now and then. For the 1Ls, we're all kind of talking about this internally at the law school, how to create a sense of community, how to create a sense of belonging for them, given that most of the curriculum, even for the 1L students, is online. We have about 40% of the classes for the 1L students in person, but it's in person in a way that's unrecognizable to anyone who's been to law school, because they come in and they have to wear masks in the building. The faculty member's wearing a mask. They're sitting 6 feet apart from each other in a classroom. So a class that would have been 30 students in a smaller classroom is spread out over a massive lecture hall. There are very few opportunities to linger in the building before and after class. So what we're seeing is they tend to come and go. Enough of their curriculum is online that as soon as class is over in the building, they have to go off somewhere to find an online a space where they can participate in a class online. So, and there are no social gatherings. We do a lot of, in a normal year, we do a lot of informal out of classroom gathering. We spend a lot of money. It's amazing how much money we spend on food and togetherness. And I think that's a good investment. I think that's something that is really essential part of the law school experience, because as much as we all think that they're coming for our brilliance in the classroom, and they are. I mean, that's part of the reason they come, but they're also coming for each other. And those connections that they form with one another are the things that they carry with them for the rest of their careers and lives. And part of the kind of lifelong connection they have to the law school is the connection they have with each other. And that's where we're really, grappling. And one thing that we're finding, I've been having these online cocktail hours focused on the 1Ls I started them kind of earlier in the semester, and I was doing them on a weekly basis, and would cap them at about 10 students because we found that that was sort of the maximum number you could really sustain a Zoom conversation with. And one thing that I learned from those meetings, apart from just the resilience of our students and the amazing sense of kind of strength that they brought to this experience. So one of the things I learned was that while they were missing the connection to the larger class, that joined them and starting in August, the connections within their section were very intense. So maybe more intense than normal. So we break each JD class into 6 sections. And they all share their entire schedule together, and they have a few classes that they experience just in that small group of about 30 students. And it's always an important source of belonging for our first year students. It seems like this year that section has become even more of a focal point. And so that's become the unit that they gather with outside of class. And they've done some safe, socially distanced, out of classroom experiences outside. They've gone apple picking, or they've gone to the farmer's market, or they've gotten together for their own off-campus gatherings. Some of them were having weekly Zoom cocktail hours for their section. And the section, I think, has become a really essential part of their experience, even more than in a normal year. And so my hope is that becomes the foundation then that they can build on when things get back to normal, that they won't experience the full 3 years as a net loss, right? That it will be a trade-off, right? That they will have traded off maybe a little bit of the broader sense of belonging within the class in the first year for a more intense communal experience with their section that they can grow beyond when we get back to a more normal experience in the fall. But in the shorter term, one of the things that we've heard consistently from our students is that they want more in-person instruction, and I think there was on the faculty side a little bit of concern about the safety of in-person instruction in coming into the fall, and so we had more faculty opting for online instruction than students, and certainly more people opting, or fewer people opting for in-person instruction than the building could accommodate, even with the social distancing that we had to do to stay safe. The experience in the fall has been overwhelmingly positive in person, both qualitatively, in the sense that the instruction, the faculty and the students both think they had great experiences in the classroom and really valued that. But also from a public health standpoint, we haven't had a single documented case of transmission in a classroom, not just at the law school, but across Cornell University. And our rate on campus has been well below even 0.1% positivity in our testing. We have a very robust system of surveillance testing at Cornell that it gets students tested twice a week, and faculty who are teaching get tested every week. And the result of that, I think, has been that incipient hotspots are caught very quickly, and then those people are quarantined, and it's really allowed the campus environment to be largely COVID-free. And that's increased confidence heading into the spring. So we have many more faculty willing to teach in person in the spring than we did in the fall. And so we've gone from maybe, if we look at the curriculum as a whole, about 25% of our classes were offered in person in the fall to something closer to 50% for the spring semester. So it's a combination of providing more in the building, providing more opportunities for in-person instruction, at least in the spring, and then looking forward to the fall and hoping that we'll be able to overcome some of the challenges that we had this year.
Right. So thank you so much for that, Dean Peñalver. Looking forward to the spring semester as well. I'm now going to take a few questions from the audience, and questions have been coming in. And the first one, I want to, these questions are going to be open to anyone to answer, right? And feel free to sort of raise your hand. No class participation marks though. So we know that there have been some opinions in June where some economists believed that the United States had gone into recession. Now, we've had similar reports here in India where last month we did move into a technical recession. Now, one of our audience members has asked, is it true that during the times of recession, law school admissions see a spurt? If so, has this year sort of proven that theory? And I'm happy to have any one of our panelists take up this question.
Well,
I'm
going to
go ahead.
Dean Warner first, and then I'll go on to Dean Mandel.
Yeah, I saw us all unmute our mics when you asked that question, so I can start, and I'm sure others will join in. So the answer is generally yes, although the 2009 recession did not show that. There was an initial increase, but then there was a substantial decrease in 2009. So that was one outlier. So far, we are seeing that this year. Applications are up dramatically. It depends a little bit on where you are in the country. The Northeast, so Eduardo, is seeing the largest increase right now. But even here in the Mountain West, we're seeing at Utah, we've seen a 50%. At the University of Utah, we've seen a 50% increase over last year. And I believe our region is up something along the lines of 28%. So 2009, we did not see that increase. It was a little bit of an outlier. Normally that's true. And so far we're seeing it this year.
All right. Dean Mandel, I believe you'd started responding.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm happy to add on to what Dean Warner was saying. And she's of course right. So going back over many decades, law school applications do tend to be cyclical in terms of their amount. They go up and they go down. But that cycle doesn't always match what's happening in either the broader United States economy or even match what's happening always in the legal economy. So sometimes people hear that law school admissions are cyclical and they associate that with economic cycles. And sometimes it lines up and sometimes it doesn't. And Dean Warner just described that's true recently. We are seeing a surge in applications this year, and applications have been down significantly in law schools nationally in the U.S. since the Great Recession. They started to tick up in around 2015, 2016 to now, but they had only been going up a little bit. They certainly haven't been surging. We're seeing a surge for next year. We don't know, we certainly don't know entirely. We're only about a quarter of the way through the admission cycle, so we don't know that that's going to hold. But we certainly all hope it does.
Right.
We don't know why it's happening. I would say anecdotally, my sense is that a couple factors are coming into play. One might be that the legal economy right now is looking pretty resilient,
right,
in the face of what's happening with the pandemic. And one of the things that's obviously happened with the pandemic is that there's a significant difference across industries and how it impacts different industries. So the legal economy is doing pretty well, and so it may look attractive. I also think we're seeing an effect from the reaction to systemic racial injustice that's been taking place in the United States over the last half year now. And I think that's causing folks to recognize how grave and deep these problems are in our society and want to do something about it. I also think over that period of time, we've seen lawyers, and by we I mean American society at least, but to some extent international society, have seen lawyers playing important roles for the good, being some of the people who stand up outside of the justice system, stand up in the justice system, and play a role that helps improve things. And I think that's playing out well. And then the third effect that sort of we're hearing about a little bit is I think the pandemic has caused some people to make some decisions about what they want to do in the next stage of their lives. And so, there are people who maybe have been thinking about law school on and off for a little while, and this, now they decide, okay, this is time to do it. Right. So I think there's a variety of reasons we might be seeing the effect.
I've got one last question, and I'm very mindful of the fact that we've literally got 5 minutes to wrap up, and I want a quick reaction from each of the three of our panelists. For those students who are watching this panel and have plans to pursue studies in law, what would be your message to them, especially on choosing the right institution? 60 seconds or less. We'll start with Dean Peñalver.
Well, I mean, the law schools are so different from one another in terms of location and areas of strength. And you know, I think that there's not one best institution for everyone. And it's incumbent on students to really do their homework, get to know the personalities of the different schools. Their you know, things like size and location really make a difference to the student experience. And if you're a real city mouse, you know, Cornell Law School is maybe not the best place for you. But if you like life out in you know, in the country, where there's a lot of great outdoors and things like that, then you know, Cornell's a terrific place. So it's really, you know, it's a very individual choice. And one of the things that I think depresses all of us is the emphasis that students place on U.S. News rankings in their evaluation of schools, and they give them a precision that they just can't claim. And I hope that you know, students will look beyond that one, just the way that that we need to look beyond certain metrics, and our admission students need to look beyond that one metric in choosing a law school, and really make an informed choice based on what the experience will be like for them.
Right. Thank you so much, Dean Peñalver. Over to you, Dean Warner. Very quickly, what's your message to aspiring law students?
That you've made a good choice. I agree with everything Eduardo just said in terms of how to pick your law school, and then just in terms of the practice of law in general. As has been mentioned, the legal profession has been pretty resilient through this latest challenge, and it's a healthy industry. At least in the United States, we have a large generation that's getting close to retirement. So I think that there's going to be an even greater need for new and smart lawyers. So congratulations, you made a great choice, and we welcome you to the practice of law, and congratulations. And again, thank you for including me on this panel. It's been a true privilege.
All right, Dean Mandel, any last words? Any parting?
My colleagues just beautifully hit the nail on the head, so I don't have a lot to add. As Eduardo said, it's very similar to advice I often give students. You can get a fabulous legal education at many law schools. I think looking for a place where it's the right fit for you along some of the lines he just mentioned. Looking for the place where the community feels right to you, to go back to an earlier conversation, I think is very important in making the decision. And then to emphasize some of the things that Liz added on there as well. I think the law is a wonderful profession for those who are interested in it. And what I mean there is, I think there was a period of time when there was one of the biggest surges in law school applications. People were almost viewing it as sort of grad school in the liberal arts. They didn't know exactly what to do, and so they went to law school. And I think this was probably more of an issue for American students than international students, who I think were clearer about their reasons. But for those who want to pursue a career in law, and there are many ways you could do it, I think it's a wonderful time to take that. Lawyers play an incredible role in our justice systems, and in how the law shapes society and orders society. And there's a lot of room for great minds. So I encourage those who are interested to pursue the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your last comments, Dean Mandel. And thank you, really. This has been a wonderful panel. We've learned so much from each other. And I'd like to thank all three of you for being here today to share your wisdom, your experiences, and your hopes and aspirations for the future. With that, I'm going to hand the virtual mic back to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. C. Raj Kumar. Raj, back to you.
Thank you so much, Arjya, and thank you, Eduardo and Gregory, and of course, Elizabeth. It's an absolutely fascinating panel, not only because of the fact that you touched upon some of the most critical issues for a lot of young people who are planning to make choices about the future, but you also, addressed some of the dilemmas that young people might have when it comes to making the choices. I've always said in a country like India, most Indian students are looking to become an engineer. we at Jindal, particularly in our law school, have waylaid their plans and have made them come into a law school. So to actually engage with that type of mindset, to actually see purpose and meaning in the pursuit of law, and to recognize the importance of law as a social institution, even at a time when issues relating to rule of law, both in your country and in other countries around the world, is a very important conversation. So I'm grateful to all of you for accepting our invitation and being part of this panel discussion.